I'm out in the snow. Probably have about 20 minutes of available light left, and I'm making some images for a follow-up, sort of a run-through tutorial, call it what you will, on processing. I don't have a lot of available time, but briefly about the settings I'm using. I'm shooting aperture priority, fast shutter speed. Due to the falling snow, I don't want trails. That's what we're running at right now. Always get 1/160 and an f8 on this one. We'll get some handheld shots here shortly. Get it off the tripod here and go for some intimates, something a little more detail. All right, back to work. Okay, so welcome to my little corner of the world, my little corner of the room. Where I left off in the first part of this video, as you saw, I was out in the woods, I was in the snow, and I was making some images so I could demonstrate my process on a particular image. I teased 3 toward the end of that video segment, and I've chosen one, and I'm going to walk through how I process the image from raw through some Lightroom edits, and then finally some finishing work in Photoshop. So without further ado, I'm going to start a screen capture so that I can switch over and you can see what I'm seeing in real time. Here we go. First of all, I'm going to bring up Lightroom and the full screen. As you can see, this is the image I'm going to be working on, and in a quick demonstration I have the images open in Photoshop. The image you're seeing right now, this is, call it image A. It is the raw, and in spite of having my camera set to the cloud setting for white balance, we're still looking a little bit blue. And here is the finished image that I teased at the end of the video. I've also shared these on my Facebook page. I believe it was yesterday. I chose this image. I like it. Its composition. This sort of, here's your eye line right through there. It's not overly complicated, it's almost a minimalistic image, and we'll get a zoom in on this. There's some noise, some residual noise. I don't mind that, given the conditions. Again, I was sort of walking the line between having a fast enough shutter speed to avoid getting the trails, but also trying to allow enough light into the camera. So again, this is the out of camera, this is in product. So let's go quickly to Lightroom, and what I've already done, you can see here, these are the settings I've used thus far to get from that really dark bluish image you saw at the beginning. The first thing I notice, these areas here, this is simply moisture water drops on the glass. That's on my lens. Had some wind, you can see the snow is sort of shifting direction. It's not coming straight down. So it's hard to avoid getting some of those, getting some of that moisture on the lens itself. And if you paid attention to the video, you saw my freezer bag cover. That sort of crunchy sound that the audio was picking up. That's a DIY method. It's also disposable. So I'm kind of liking where this is here. I set the exposure up, reduced some of the contrast, reduced some highlights, increased my shadows, brought up some of the, raised the black. See, if you go down with it, you get this dark. So I was going up with it to lighten it. Didn't do anything with my tone curve. I did adjust the image temperature, slight increase in the vibrance, increased the clarity, dehazed plus 28. So the next logical step would be, for me, I prefer to do the more detailed edits in Photoshop. It's just, it's a better workflow for me. So we'll go into Photoshop and we're going to take this image in Photoshop, and what I'm going to attempt to do is to bring it as close to the previous finished image. I may find some areas of improvement, things, one day you don't see, the next day you do. That's just natural. So again, one of the first things I'm going to do is get rid of these very apparent water drops. A situation like this, where it's subtle, working white on white, I invert because they really stand out, and you can see there's some down here as well as here. This is probably a snowflake right there. So I'm going to get my cloning tool. I'm using a large brush, soft brush. This is a 250, and I'm going to be selecting an area relatively close to the target because there is variation from one side to the other, and you don't want your edit to be obvious. You don't want to get this very apparent hard edge. It's like basically you just be recreating the problem you're trying to fix. So there we go. Get rid of those. I think those are brake lights. Look at that. If you printed this image on a larger scale, I think as the viewer you'd be drawn in and say, what's that red thing? Is that a mistake? Is that something in the camera? So we'll back out. That looks relatively clean. I don't see any of those marks any longer. Go back to a regular view. Looks pretty good to me. So the next step is to jump back into the camera raw filter, this time the camera raw filter in Photoshop. Similar settings to what you see in Lightroom. I think Lightroom offers a little more flexibility. I don't know, it's the same product family. Some of the features in the camera raw filter in Photoshop I don't touch on because I can do that in Lightroom. So I'm going to bring the exposure up a tiny bit. That's a 0.5 contrast plus 20. Looks good. Now in case of the highlights, again, this is snow. We can reduce those highlights. You see that opens up a little bit of nuance in tone in the sky. You can see a little bit of nuance right in here. These are actually shadows. So by taking those highlights down to 0 and by reducing the whites, really what you're going to get is you're going to inherit a little bit of that blue back, that sort of blue tone, which in other circumstances I can then go back and offset by using a little bit of warmth. Let's do 10, a little more clarity. I try to make sure that my out of camera shots are of a higher quality so that, I'm not doing everything in post. Now, this is a good example of the unavoidable condition of the weather. That was sort of on my mind when I went out, and as I mentioned earlier in the video, when I was in the field, I had maybe 20 minutes of available light. It was coming, the sun was coming down fast. Couldn't see it if you tried. There's so much cloud cover, and again, a relatively heavy amount of snow falling. So back to this. Again, that dehazing, you'll notice an increase in the dehaze. You can see the darkness in the trees enhanced, and there are times to use one way or the other. Under the circumstances, I'm just going to allow a little bit of an increase, because again, this is snow and you get that hazy, wintry look. As far as vibrance, I'm going to punch that up 25 and a tiny bit on the saturation scale, plus 10. Now, the raw filter also has presets. Sometimes these come in handy. Sometimes they provide a foundation to get you some of the way you want to be. They'll get you to a place to start to do further edits. Sometimes they offer little in the way of change if you've already got it close to where you want it to be. Now, you get a little blue, I don't know, maybe natural. Not over processing it, just giving it a nice, a little more finish, getting away from that saturation of blue light. So again, this is where we started. This is where I wound up today. Now, let's just see where my feelings lie, where I wind up versus the image I processed originally. Okay. I guess my feelings lean toward a little more color in my original. This is a little more subtle, but close. Well, those are some basics to how I processed the image that I shared. There's always some degree of trial and error, and if you're functioning more creatively, a little more artistically, and you're going for more, of a feeling, you want to convey a feeling that you had. The way you process an image on Thursday, the day you shot it, and the way you process the image, that same image, say a month later, you're likely to get a different color story, a different palette. But again, that's sort of the nature of the more artistic photography. So that being said, I hope you're enjoying your Sunday, and thank you for sitting through this, and I hope it was helpful. Obviously, your feedback is always welcome and encouraged, and if there's anything that I can share, tips, tricks, processing methods, you can visit me on my Facebook page. You're certainly welcome to leave the comments below, and I'll put a link to my Facebook page in the description. So, cheers.